Hey, welcome to the channel, or welcome back to the channel. I'm Nick, and I make videos about things that I like. Be it gaming or design, you can find a little bit of everything right here. Today, we're going to be taking a look at some of the most interesting indie games I've found on Steam. But before that, go ahead and subscribe, ring the bell, and at the end, leave a like if you liked the video, and leave a dislike if you disliked it. It all helps in engagement. So, now that we have that out of the way, let's get to the games. Tiny Glade is marketed as a small, relaxing game about doodling castles, and this is the first point I want to praise the devs for. They do an amazing job setting expectations for this game, and that's something a lot of games tend to stumble on. It's incredibly important that you don't oversell your game, and what people will get out of it. Sure, there's a balance that you should try to hit, and you should absolutely make sure people know what makes your game unique and fun, but in my opinion, I would much prefer a dev undersell me on their game and let the person recommending it to me tell me how great it is, rather than telling me directly that it's some giant sprawling game, which it just frankly isn't. So that's something I really respect right up front about this particular dev. I know going into this game that it's not going to be some kind of massive medieval city builder or management sim with incredibly deep and complex mechanics, but in a cozy wrapper. After playing the demo, which was briefly available a couple weeks ago, I think you get everything you need to know about this game from the store page description and screenshots. It is exactly what it says on the tin. It's a cozy little castle doodler. There is no complex systems management or strategy to where you place certain buildings. There are no people to worry about keeping alive. It really is just a cozy castle doodler. And for that, I absolutely adore it. One of the most engaging things about a lot of survival games to me is the building aspect. And yes, a lot of that is rooted in the gradual progression and expansion as you play the game, but also, I just love making awesome buildings that look beautiful or give a certain vibe. And this should offer exactly that, just without any of the real time requirement. In theory, I can just hop on for 20 to 30 minutes and make a beautiful medieval village and take some cute photos of it, and then get back to work. I honestly anticipate this will be one of my most played games once it releases. Even if it was only what's available in the demo, I would be happy. But there should be some features unlocked on full release, like the ability to build in a much wider area, and some more customization features, which will make your little castle far more personal. But this is all without mentioning perhaps the most standout feature of the game, or at least the one that caught my eye, and that is the procedural aspect. You've probably noticed from the press footage I've been playing on screen that they're building systems to allow you to simply, like the description says, doodle your castle into existence. You can draw walls and roads on the ground, and where they intersect, a door will appear. You can place two windows next to each other, and they'll magically morph into a new type of window, or you can place lights, which will automatically switch between wall-mounted or freestanding. The buildings can be moved around at will, and will merge into the walls in place and form doors where they intersect a road. And you can even push and pull the terrain to shape it to your liking. It's amazingly fluid, and one of the most satisfying interactions I've had in a game in a long time. I'm sure if you know how to make a game, this isn't like the most groundbreaking thing in the world, but as far as I'm concerned, this is magic. It's amazing, and even if you do know how to make a game, I'm sure this is still incredibly impressive from a technical perspective. But regardless, just as a visual showcase, this is so engrossing. Whenever I go into their store page, I just get stuck on watching the videos of all the different things that you can do. And not from a critical perspective of trying to figure out if the game is good, but from an in-awe perspective of how satisfying it is to watch everything be generated and shift and morph as it's drawn into existence. This feels like the promise of computers realized for me. The ability to simply drag your cursor across the screen and with a few clicks have a charming little village you can admire and take countless pictures of. It's absolutely incredible, and I think they avoid one of the major pitfalls of procedural generation that a lot of games fall into. Most games that utilize procedural generation either wind up with something that looks just kind of weird and not quite right, or everything looking so similar that it lacks a certain personality. But making the act of building procedural allows everyone's castle to be completely different while still feeling recognizable and coherent. kind of in the same way that a period style does in the real world. I think this game has a real possibility to foster a thriving community of people who make amazing little villages and create entire social media pages showing off all their tiny creations. In case it wasn't obvious, I can't wait for this game to release, and I will be jumping on it day one regardless of how much it costs. I would wager a guess it will be somewhere in the ballpark of $30 to $40 though, and frankly I would spend $60 on it. Having seen all the media the devs posted on Steam, and getting to play around with the demo for a bit, I am thoroughly convinced that this is going to be one of my all-time favorites. So I highly recommend that you keep your eye on it as well. The release is currently set for Q3 2024, so it should be coming out relatively soon. So if you're as hyped for this game as I am, go add it to your wishlist now so the dev knows just how many of us want to support their amazing efforts. But speaking of little cozy indie games I'm excited for, the Steam page for this describes it as a cozy co-op horror game where you rescue your human from a haunted mansion together with another pupper. And that is all I need. I'm constantly on the lookout for games that I can play with my girlfriend, and I think this one will be an absolute hit. From what I can see on the Steam page and the description, it's seemingly mostly a puzzle game in a kinda spooky haunted setting. You get to choose which breed of doggo you are, customize their specific look, which the devs say will give you enough freedom to make them look like your very own furry friend, and give them fun little costumes. And then you can set out to follow your human's scent and save them from whatever spooky situation they've found themselves caught up in this time. I would go out on a limb and say it's probably not going to be like horror, and you probably won't have to worry about seeing your dog get eviscerated or anything like that. They show the players running away from different hazards and they all seem tame enough. My point is, I don't think it's going to be a scary or gross out kind of game. It looks like it's much more centered around puzzle solving in a spooky environment rather than jump scares or body horror. I can't say too much about the gameplay yet, other than what's already been shown in videos, but it looks very similar to the controls of something like Untitled Goose Game. And the art style follows that trend as well. Everything has very flat colors and little, if any, texture or bump maps. And that's not a bad thing. I think that really helps get a more spooky Halloween store vibe rather than a truly scary horror vibe, which I think is a good thing for a game where you play as two adorable puppies. All in all, I am super excited for this game to release. It looks like such a fun time and just exudes chill, cozy game energy. And I mean, come on, who doesn't want some absolutely impeccable spooky vibes? I really hope this releases before or around Halloween, because this would be the perfect game to curl up on the couch and take on all these spooky adventures with a significant other on a cold October night. In case you couldn't tell, this game is right up my alley, and I will absolutely be picking it up day one, whenever that ends up being. Currently, the Steam page says to be announced, so we'll just have to wait and see. But in case you're looking for a game with a more solid release date, let's check out. Now this one's a bit more controversial than our other entries on this list. This is an Animal Crossing / Stardew Valley-like, but set in Tolkien's Middle-earth. Now on the nose, that premise sounds perfect. I mean, what would people take issue with in that pitch? And honestly, I'm right there with you. I think it looks like a really fun, little, cozy farming game that I could probably sink tens of hours into. And frankly, I probably will. It looks like they'll let you create a little hobbit house of your own, and I hope they let you customize the layout outside of just furniture, but that remains to be seen. They have shown that you can definitely change a lot about the appearance of the interior for sure, and it looks like there will be plenty of furniture options to create and place just how you want them, so you can make your hobbit hole fit your own personal style. As for the gameplay itself, it seems like it's going to be a bit simpler than something like Stardew Valley. It definitely seems to lean more towards the Animal Crossing side of the comparison, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I love Stardew Valley, and the depth is the reason it has such a fervent community still today, but I personally do appreciate the more chill and low-key vibe of something like Animal Crossing. Now, it remains to be seen if you'll be able to change the layout of the town that you're living in, like in Animal Crossing, though I wouldn't get your hopes up for that. I have a feeling you're mainly going to be focusing on the immediate area in and around your hobbit hole, because they haven't really shown much outside of that. and I think the town is going to function similarly to the town in Stardew, with seasonal festivals and events. However, on the game's website, they do hint at the fact that the town of Baywater is not yet an official town, and you can take part in helping the quaint town flourish. So who knows, maybe you'll be able to decide things like road placement or home locations for new residents. And there does seem to be a time element as well, though it's not clear if you're going to be required to log in every day or if the days will pass on their own time, totally out of sync with the real world and our seasons. Again, I would assume the latter because that generally seems to be the approach most games take, and I think it's generally a better approach so you don't have to wait an actual real-life year if you miss an event or something. But back to what I hinted at in the intro, the controversies surrounding this game. Okay, controversy might be a bit hyperbolic. Skepticism might be a bit more accurate. Regardless though, the main thing people seem to take issue with is not really anything the game has control over, and that is the fact that it's just one more Stardew Valley / Animal Crossing like added to the growing pile. There's a bit of a cozy game fatigue hitting the gaming world, and I can't say I necessarily blame them. If you search cozy farming game on Steam, you'll get a plethora of different titles, most of which are not the best. So it's really not too surprising people are a bit wary of a game that's just another entry in a rather oversaturated genre, which is made by an unproven studio, or at least unproven in video games. Tales from the Shire is, as far as I can tell, the first Weta Workshop developed game to be published. Weta apparently started the game division in 2014, so I can only assume they've had multiple projects in that time that have just never been published. Or perhaps they worked as consultants for other games. I can't find a conclusive answer, and frankly, it doesn't matter to me. If anyone knows the Middle-earth aesthetic and world, it's Weta Workshop. Weta were the VFX house that physicalized the world of the Lord of the Rings as we know it today, and in many ways, the fantasy genre itself. Sure, this may be their first game, but if I'm going to give anybody the benefit of the doubt with a first game, it's Weta. From what I've seen in interviews and behind-the-scenes clips, they seem to have a culture of quality and unrelenting adherence to that culture. They aren't the usual game development house, and I personally trust that they can get this done in the best way that it could be done. And I will definitely be checking it out once it goes up for purchase, so if you're interested in a more in-depth review of this game to see if it's any good, let me know in the comments and maybe I'll make a dedicated video about it. It's set to release in 2024, so we only have a handful of months left before we finally get our hands on it, and I am quite excited. But, speaking of games that I'm excited for, this is a really interesting little game. However, I'm not quite as bullish on it as I was for Tiny Glade. Now, I think the concept is super interesting, but I don't think I'm quite sold on the idea as much more than a gimmick. However, I haven't played it yet, so all I can go off of is the promise. And as far as promises go, I think this is super interesting. It's a platformer which takes place in two worlds, one 2D and one 3D. The 2D world is on the screen of a Game Boy-ish device, which allows you to see different interactable objects which don't appear in the 3D world. And you have to shift focus between the two worlds and use them both to navigate the level. For example, the enemies and their projectiles are invisible in the real world, but you can see them on the screen of the Game Boy, so you have to fight them on the Game Boy while also maneuvering in the real world. I think for a certain type of gamer, this is perfect. It has the potential to present a very real and interesting level of difficulty, but in a more novel and meta way than most platformers choose to go for. Like I said, I think the premise is super cool, and I really want to give it a shot. However, I am just a bit wary of how smooth it will actually feel to play. Something that is very important to get right in a platformer is the feel of doing something as simple as a jump. It's not as straightforward as a lot of people assume it would be, and a dev's ability to make that feel right can make or break a game. The developers themselves have said that it does feel fluid and intuitive once you start playing, so like I said, I'm very interested to give it a shot, and I hope a demo is available sooner rather than later so we can all try it out and see for ourselves, because unlike Tiny Glade, I don't think this is a game that demos super well without being able to actually play it firsthand. But let's get back to the positives. Something I really respect about these devs is their clear understanding of what their audience wants. I can tell these devs are gamers themselves. I think it's clear that they're making a game that they would want to play and would want to exist rather than just wanting to make some money on a proven successful game type. They seem to be really attempting to innovate within such a fundamental game genre, and I can really respect that. And a great example of that attitude, I think, is in the inclusion of a level editor. This has the potential to give the game legs far past what the devs are able to create, and in general, I think allowing your players to create their own custom levels is kind of a must for platformers these days. There is simply no reason not to let us futz around with the game if we want to, and I really respect them for giving up control to the player base like that. Like I said, I think this will be really interesting to a certain type of gamer, someone who really likes a challenge and doesn't get frustrated easily by somewhat unintuitive controls. I think if you played and had a good time with getting over it, this game is probably going to be really interesting to you. And even if that's not necessarily you, I would recommend keeping your eye on this one for when a demo hopefully comes out, because it really is such an interesting concept, and I can't wait to see exactly how they execute on it. This is the last game on the list, and it's a very interesting one. On the surface, it's a basic survival crafting game, which is enough for me to be on board, but it differentiates itself from the herd in a few cool ways. For one, the world you're surviving and crafting in is made of floating sky islands. And I'm not talking about a mainland over which there are a couple floating islands. I mean the entire game takes place on and between sky islands. That alone is all I need. But on top of that, there seems to be a heavy emphasis on the use of grappling hooks. I mean, it's the first thing they show in the animated trailer for the game, and while I would normally be pretty put off by a nearly entirely animated trailer, they do have what looks like some in-engine footage at the very end, which does show grapple usage, and it seems to be fairly free form. Now, if they're able to make it work like it does in Halo Infinite, where you can literally grapple to anything, I will be a very happy man. But even if they do limit it to working like it does in the Arkham games, that will be more than enough to get me on board. Just please, for the love of God, don't make me find a specific grapple point every time I want to use it. That's all I ask. I've said it before, and I will say it again, all games would be better with a grappling hook, and I will not be taking rebuttals. But wait, there's more. Not only can you explore these awesome sky islands with your grappling hook, and hopefully extremely fluidly jump from one to the next, but you can also create and customize your own flying ship as well. The latest development update shows that we should be free to add modules to the ship in any direction, and they say this should allow for plenty of freedom when creating ships. But what's the point of ships without something to fight with them, right? Well, that's where these sky bosses come in. Think the Caldera boss in Tears of the Kingdom. Giant flying enemies that presumably will block access to new regions and serve as progression markers as you make your way through the game. Hopefully they'll have some kind of trophy system so you can show off which bosses you've beaten and scare away any would-be ne'er-do-wells, though that's really up to the creative team. All in all, though, this just looks like a really great game. At least the pitch does, anyway. So I will be keeping a very close eye on this game until it releases, and if it's any good, I'll definitely include it in a future video. But that's 5 indie games you should be keeping your eye on. And if you don't feel like it, I'll try to keep you updated with the ones that are worth your time. So stay tuned and make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a video. But that's all for today's video. I hope you had a good time and found a game or two worth adding to your wish list. And of course, feel free to put any suggestions for games I should check out or include in a future video down in the comments. It's always really helpful to hear from you. Other than that though, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and as always, happy gaming.